Hey everyone, welcome to Clubbing Country today. Wow, I am not ready for the World Cup. I'm getting there though. It is getting very, very close. Just a few days away from the opener. David Goss and Bobby Warshaw with you here as we are going through every single group. Bobby's getting me ready for the World Cup. Clearly, I need it, and I am getting ready on my own. I printed out the groups in the nice little format, Bobby, to put in my apartment so that I have a physical representation of the World Cup, and that's really helping me zone in. Clearly not 100%, but I'm like 99% of the way there.
Where did you find a printer? David?
My wife did it at work in her office.
Oh, smart.
It's the only place I can print it.
I've been meaning to tell you, whenever you open the Twitter Spaces, you would leave it open while you're on mute for a moment, and you look down and write and take notes. And it's very Anderson Cooper of you.
Thank you.
I'm always very impressed and honored to be on with you in that moment for your professionalism.
I don't know if you watched the Japan game this morning against Canada, who we will talk about coming up in just a moment, because we're going to talk about groups F and G. And I know that because I have them printed out in front of me. But their manager, Hajime Murasu, he wears a vest, which is classy, and then he has like a moleskin notebook that he takes notes in the whole game. And that is a classy way to manage a national team. And that's kind of how I'm picturing myself right now through your eyes.
Anderson Cooper would definitely wear a suit on the sideline.
Yeah, obviously. Silver Fox, you have to show off for everyone. So it's going to be a good show here. We've got Group F, as I said, Canada, part of that, alongside two semifinalists from the 2018 World Cup and Morocco. And then we've got Group G to talk about. If you have missed any of our shows, you will search MLS Today on Spotify or any of your podcast apps, which will bring you Clubbing Country Today. We are living in that feed for the next month. Monday, Group A breakdown with Pa Moduka. Tuesday, Group B and C, including a Mexico deep dive with Hugo Ramirez. A lot of the issues we talked about, you saw on the field yesterday against Sweden for this Mexico team. Yesterday, we broke down Group D and E, including some of the favorites in France, Spain, Germany. And now we are on to Group F and G. Bobby, before we get there, we're going to hit a little news off the top. Fortunately, no huge injury news. But as I said, some of the teams have gotten on the field in the Middle East or in Europe, depending on which teams you're talking about. And so some big results that came out yesterday, some interesting lineups. News as well. Croatia knocked off Saudi Arabia 1-0. We'll talk about Croatia a little bit more coming up. Argentina, 5-0 wins in Dubai against the UAE. Interesting note there. It was basically their best 11, but Julian Alvarez starting in place of Lautaro Martinez. You assume that's for health reasons, but Alvarez has been good for Man City when he's played, and he looked very good yesterday for Argentina. Poland, a 1-0 win over Chile. That one in Poland, because it's close enough for them to now fly to Qatar. And that one was without Lewandowski. And then the two big results, the surprises to close out things yesterday. Mexico, 2-1 loss to Sweden, who will not play in the World Cup. Raul Jimenez, 45 minutes off the bench, coming on at halftime alongside Andres Guardado and some of the other big names. But for Mexico, outside of Edson Alvarez, all of their starters played in this game. And so a 2-1 loss, not the form they wanted. As Hugo talked about, this is one of the most pessimistic teams that Mexico has had in a World Cup, maybe in the 21st century. And so I think a lot of the fans, journalists, former players, people around this team have only gotten worse over the last 24 hours. And then this morning, Ghana, 2-0 win over Switzerland, that one neutral site in the Middle East. So a massive win for Ghana, a big result for Switzerland, who we will talk about in just a moment as part of Group G. And the news there, Jan Sommer, who hasn't played in a month, star goalkeeper, one of the best in the world. He returned from his ankle injury to at least play in this one, although not successfully in the end. If you are listening, we are going to dive in, as we said, to Group F and Group G. If you have any comments that we miss or any questions you want us to hit, just tweet at us, and I will run through that throughout the show, and we'll bring in your ideas, your comments. We'll hit what you want us to hit as we talk about all of these teams. Bobby, Group F, It is Belgium, Canada, Morocco, and Croatia. As I said, 2 2018 World Cup semifinalists in Croatia and Belgium. Croatia getting to the final. Morocco coming out of Africa, and Canada in their first World Cup in 36 years. You're going to get us started here with Belgium.
Yeah, well, David, we always start these groups by first looking at how the betting markets predict who will make it out. And we do that because betting markets tend to be the most accurate projection of what is to come. It's a combination of their statistical modeling, but also what experts around the world who do this for a living to try and make money think about these teams. And it helps us ground us in the expectations, because we might think that Japan is really good, but if, as we found out yesterday, if the betting market only thinks they have a 20% chance of getting out of the group, it should have us reconsider. So we'll start all of the groups by looking at BetMGM's projections for who makes it into the knockout rounds. And as we've seen over the first 3 days, there are two types of groups that we see. The first, which we saw in the first three groups, is when there is a definitive top team and then two teams from Pot B and Pot C who each have equal roughly 50% of making it out of the group. And then the second framework is when there are two definitively top teams. We saw it yesterday when Denmark, the second best team in the group, still had about a 75% chance of making it out. And today, David, we are actually split on the way the two groups are molded. The first group, as you said, with Belgium, Croatia, Morocco, and Canada, is the second type. When Croatia, the second favorite, is still a pretty dominant force projected to make it out. Belgium, about 90%, like we usually see. Perhaps unsurprisingly, they actually have the second lowest projection of all of the top seeds to make it out of their group. They're slightly higher than Portugal, but they're definitely lower than the Englands, the France, the Brazils to make it out. Below them is Croatia at about 65%, and then Morocco at 30%, and Canada at about 25% projection to make it out of the group. Would I tell you that Morocco is slightly ahead of Canada? What's your immediate reaction to that?
It's not surprise, because you're talking about inexperience with Canada. Also, I host a podcast in Canada around Canadian soccer. I've covered this team very long. I have a lot of excitement. We're going to talk about it. The resume for Canada is almost equal, if not better, for Morocco. When you just talk about pieces, right? Well, Alphonso Davies is one of the best fullbacks in the world. Well, so is Hakimi. Right? Jonathan David, up-and-coming attacker. Well, there's pieces. So they are very similar resumes, and Morocco has more experience as well as, I think, more depth.
Yeah, and right now, at least the world betting markets think that Morocco is the favorite. Again, those from BetMGM. And David, starting with Belgium, the favorite in the group. We always like to start with a piece of trivia, so we learn something about these countries come World Cup time. And did you know that the Brussels airport sells more, and I'm going to leave this blank because I want you to fill it in,
okay, than
any other location in the world? What is the thing that the Brussels airport sells more of?
Chocolate.
It is chocolate.
Boom.
Did you know that?
Yes.
Or did you just look in your cabinet and guess?
All of these things. Yes. I got in trouble for playing the fool yesterday on your Denmark population question. Everyone got mad at me. So no more Mr. Nice Guy.
All right, bring it. I like it. Yeah. So the Brussels airport sells more chocolate per day than anywhere else in the world. Which, of course, shout out to the chocolate lovers out there.
You want to know my theory?
Yes.
Belgium is famous for its chocolate. Brussels is a big transfer airport. So people land at the airport. They don't go to Belgium, and they say, I'm in Brussels. I need to buy chocolate, and they bring it on to their next destination.
Are you a duty-free type of guy?
Not at all. I have never, but I always think it's cool when people do, but I've literally beeline through that space.
All right. The Belgian national team, how did they get here to the World Cup? Well, they won their group in UEFA qualifying ahead of Wales and Czech Republic. Unsurprising. I think that's what we would expect of this Belgian team. And the last time we saw them was in the loss to Italy in the quarterfinals of the 2020 Euros. Remember that Italy won those Euros, even though that Italian team did not qualify for the World Cup. It's not a horrible loss for Belgium, perhaps a little disappointing, but a fair result overall. And David, the one thing I would take into watching this Belgium team, we talked about it in one of the 5 storylines overall for the tournament, and it is the last chance for their golden generation. The likes of Kevin De Bruyne, Eden Hazard, Alex Witsel, Jan Vertonghen, Toby Alderweireld, there's even more, but the main core of this team is at least at the back end of their prime, if not already, into their post-peak stages. And Belgium has always been a good footballing nation. They've probably never been this good with this many superstars, and they have waited over the last really 5 major international tournaments to bring home a trophy, and they haven't, and this is probably the last chance to do so.
So I, in getting ready for this as well, sort of read all the same or watched all the same content as you, which is that expectation. And I just want to throw out there that I think it's absurd. This is a country that didn't qualify for the 2006 and 2010 World Cup because they basically have no history of being successful at this stage outside of one tournament in 1986. And this team has been first or second in the world for 5 years and finished third at the 2018 World Cup. And so I think there's a conversation around pressure that what if they don't win? And I think that you should be in a spot where it's incredible what they've done and whatever they do is all gravy.
That actually is how I feel. And if I didn't verbalize that properly, then that's my fault. But I think that this is a really nice spot in sport where they have expectations. They are bringing joy to their country, and people do hope and think that they can win a trophy, but it's not in a poisonous or a toxic way, which we often do see, right? If Brazil doesn't win, that's a dangerous scenario. Some other countries don't win. It truly brings sorrow and sadness on the country. I don't think that's true about Belgium. There are expectations, there are hopes, but I would have thought that it's mostly just in a positive, can only go up type of way.
Okay.
Is that a better reflection of how you think about them?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So on Belgium, by the way, we might be wrong because apparently the Belgian FA canceled viewing parties in Belgium because there was no interest from fans. So we might also be wrong, or it's really cold in Belgium during a Winter World Cup and people don't want to stand outside and watch games as a group. The big question mark to me around this team is Roberto Martinez. And I think a lot of people sort of feel that way. He could be a valuable factor for them in winning. He also could be a reason for them losing. He could be neutral. But in my mind, you talked about that back end of the roster or back ages of the stars. They're not good enough anymore for him to be neutral. Like, he has to be a factor for them to win games rather than just get out of the way and let the best talent win.
I think that's a fair concern, but my response to that is to the part you went to the line you used to open the section, which is they basically been top 5 in the world since he took over. The proof is already in the pudding there, and the fact that he has already taken them to the top of the world stage. And when you do get to this point, as much as I do think there is expectation, there is hope on their shoulders, you also have to acknowledge that in those last 2 or 3 games, it does come down to luck. It does come down to fortune. And I don't know how much more of that you can put on the manager, in the sense that Roberto Martinez has done his job to put them in those last 2 or 3 games and give luck a chance to be on their side.
One complaint has been he's held on a little bit too long with some of that generation, mainly the defense, Jan Vertonghen and Toby Alderweireld. I don't think we should be talking about them in 2022 anymore. But there is young pieces in Zeno de Bos coming in as well. Yeah. That's going to be the question mark for this team. And
it's particularly important to go in the soccer direction for a second, because of course Belgium will have the majority of the ball. We've seen how Canada will play, which is to sit a little deeper and make it very hard on their opponents. And can Toby Alderweireld and Jan Vertonghen defend in transition? Can they defend in space? If they have to defend Jonathan David into a channel, is that an option? So that's what I'll be keeping an eye on from the soccer side, is whether they can keep up with the pace of the opposition in transition.
All right, let's keep rolling on in Group F. Let's go to Morocco. Morocco, my fact about Morocco, by the way, is just tagine's the best dish on the planet. And if you are sitting around watching Morocco or thinking about Morocco or watching the World Cup or doing anything, you should get some Moroccan food, because I think it's the number 1 cuisine on the planet. The big picture on this team is they fired their head coach in August after qualifying for the World Cup. Vahid Halilhovic was let go because he refused to call in some of the biggest names in this country's soccer, mainly in Ziyech, of course, the star from Chelsea, but Mazraoui and Hariti as well. I mean, Hariti also were being left out of the team. Hariti actually injured this weekend, so that may not matter. They have all returned to the team since Halilhovic has been let go, which, Bobby, by the way, this is the 3rd time in Halihovic's career that he has qualified for a World Cup and been fired before the World Cup started, which is absurd when you think about how little time there normally is between a qualification, and a draw happened in 2010 with Ivory Coast, 2014 with Japan, and now again with Morocco. I think people don't really like him very much as a person, and it's hard to get along with him for long enough. Now, the FA president in the presentation of the new coach, Walid Regragui, said that the focus of the national team was AFCON 2024 and World Cup 2026. He basically looked past this World Cup, acknowledging that they were a little too late in the process to turn things around, but there's a ton of talent on this team. So personally, I'd love to see them be successful. And it would make a ton of sense if they did have a good run in this tournament. In World Cup qualifying, they went 7-1-0. They had 25 goals scored, which is second in all of Africa, 3 goals against. They dominated their group, and then they won their playoff against DR Congo 5-2. In 2021 AFCON, they went to the quarterfinals, which was maybe a little bit upsetting. And then in the 2018 World Cup, they finished 4th in their group. It was their first World Cup since 1998. In which they were, in 1986, I believe they were the first African team to get out of their group in World Cup history. They struggled through a group, losing the opening game against Iran, and then had to play Portugal and Spain. My juice for this team, Bobby? The fans. I sat in the Morocco fan section for that opening game against Iran. They are incredible. There's an expectation that they'll have a huge presence in Qatar because of the proximity and the opportunity to travel there and support this team. And so this is going to be one of those teams I think that's going to play for those fans, and they're going to be a lot of fun.
Before I say something, do you want me to give you more space to talk about Moroccan food for a moment?
No, I think we're okay. People can put it in the chat. Tweet at us if you want me to talk about it more, and I'll give you some tips.
I just know how much Moroccan food means to you.
It's so
I just wanted to make sure.
I'm getting it for lunch today.
I think everything you said is fair. I am a little disappointed that you did not talk about their main element, their main advantage coming into this. And it is perhaps one of the most beautiful things in soccer when it does happen. And it is when at least 2 of your best players are your outside backs. When you're Greg Berhalter has used the word superpower for the U.S. men's national team, but when you're superpower, when your 2 best players are your outside backs, which we have in right back Mesroui and left back Hakimi, maybe Ziyech is somewhere in that top 3. But when your best players are your outside backs, mwah.
Okay, Bobby, I know that that's your happy place, and I agree with you. I think Hakimi to me is the reason you tune in to this team. He is the best right back on the planet, best right wing back, whatever he is playing. There is a potential that in the 3rd group stage game, he will go up along the same wing against Alphonso Davies, who are both the best at what they do in the world. They're both young. They're both emerging talents, but stars already for their national team. That alone is must-watch stuff. And then, of course, Ziyech coming back into the team is must-watch as well. 15 months without a call-up to Morocco because at the time, Halihovic said he turned down call-ups for friendlies because he said they didn't matter. He denies that, and then he was not able to get back into the team. And then, of course, it turns out that people who run FAs like talent over coaches, hence he is no longer part of it. But this Morocco team is going to be a really interesting one, Bobby, because I think there is a fairly high range of how they can perform. If it all falls apart under a new coach at the last minute, that's one thing. But if the talent all hits and is able to play at their peak, this is a team that can get out of the group.
Okay. And I'm not going to put you on the spot to say, will they get out of the group? Because we'll do that tomorrow.
Okay.
But you have put it on the table that it is capable of happening.
100%.
If tomorrow you say they're not going to, I'm going to call you out for it because you know how I feel when people put it on the table and then push it off right away.
And don't forget, on Monday, my young breakout star of the tournament was Easy Abde, who's part of this Morocco team.
Okay. And remind, if you have your own young breakout star, we're going to track that throughout the tournament. So keep it in mind. Let us know who you have. Moving on, Croatia is the second favorite. Again, about 65 to 70% projection to make it out, twice as high as Morocco and Canada. And my quick trivia was just me going back through and remembering a bit about the history of Croatia, and that it was through the late 1800s, early 1900s, part of the Austria-Hungary Empire. And then in the 20th century, it turned into the first version of Yugoslavia before World War I. And then it was Yugoslavia again after World War I. And then they actually, as a country, Croatia, declared their independence from Yugoslavia in 1991. And they have been the independent nation of Croatia as we know it since that point in 1991. I know you know a lot about this stuff. What do you have to add there?
The story is that independence movement started at a soccer game. That is one of the big soccer stories people like to tell around the world of the importance, but also the political nature of the sport.
Okay. Do you know the other countries that formed Yugoslavia?
Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Kosovo.
I need to check on the Kosovo part, or do you know for sure?
Well, the Kosovo part is going to come up when we talk about Group G, so that's why I guessed it.
Okay, nice. All right, so how did this Croatia team make it to the World Cup? Well, they won their UEFA qualifying group 1 point ahead of Russia. And of course, they returned to this 2022 tournament after losing in the 2018 final to France. They had beaten England in the semifinals to make it to that point. When we saw them last, it was in the 2020 Euros in the first knockout round, losing to Spain in extra time. But you might also know them from their current Nations League run, which has them top of the group ahead of France, who, remember, are really struggling heading into this tournament, and Denmark, who were the top outsider team to follow. So Croatia also entering this tournament in pretty good form.
All right, Bobby, you said 2018 World Cup final. I think for a lot of people, that's the last time they tuned in. Is this the same team? Is this a different team? What's sort of the expectations now? Yeah,
very good question, because they did surprise us when they made the run to 2018. They were in the mold of how we described Denmark, where they were the team most likely to make it late in the knockout rounds, and it still had some honesty to it. It felt like they deserved it. Nobody thought that Croatia got lucky on that run, but it's hard to gauge whether that's who this country is, a footballing nation, or whether it was still an anomaly. The team is actually mostly the same, and I'll talk about the parts that it's different, and then I want to talk about why we can still bind it to that 2018 run. The head coach is the same. The main differences are Ivan Rakitic, who used to play for Barcelona, is now at Sevilla. He is out of center midfield, but in his place is Mateo Kovacic, who is a pretty regular starter for Chelsea. The center backs from that 2018 team are changed, but in come two young, good players, including one starter for RB Leipzig right now. And then the final main change is the center forward, Mandzukic, who at the time of 2018 World Cup was playing regularly for Juventus, is out, but in his place comes in a regular for Hoffenheim in the Bundesliga. So perhaps some marginal drop over those key positions, but you would still think they have the quality to be in the conversation for a knockout run. The main thing that binds them together, David, and for me, it's the one thing to know and think about with this team, is that Luka Modric is still there, and it's probably the last run for Luka Modric, who is one of the most special players in his generation. And the way I think about Luka Modric is, David, is there a player of this generation, of the last 10 years, who can dominate a game in all facets from center midfield like Luka Modric?
No, I guess Conte would be the other one that you bring up, that I would bring up.
N'Golo Kante is a good shout. I would say that he cannot dominate the game in possession like Luka Modric can. Yeah. And that you have maybe a Toni Kroos, Modric's teammate at Real Madrid, who can dominate a game in possession, but maybe can't do it in transition or in the defensive phases. Because the incredible thing about Modric is he's unreal on the ball. But then you also see times when his team is struggling and he's chasing into the channels. He's going to press. He's slide tackling to get the ball back. And you're like, he turned this game back in his team's favor for everything he was doing off of the ball. And I was going to say, one of my joys of this sport, and I'm realizing I brought up like 9 of them in the last 4 days. But one of my other joys is an all-around, do everything, completely dominate the game center midfielder. And I think Luka Modric, and if there's somebody else we haven't talked about, please let us know. But I think Luka Modric tops that list of this current generation. And I want to appreciate him while I still can at these events.
One of the big things that stands out to me is you mentioned the guys who are out. Rakitic and Modric obviously had a special relationship in their time playing together. But Mandzukic, while he was at the end of his career, the stat that popped out to me is this team led all teams at the 2018 World Cup in crosses completed, as well as in World Cup qualifying. Mandzukic was elite as a target at the back post, winning balls in the air, both for goals, but also for knockdowns. And so while Kamaric is a high-level player at Hoffenheim, and there's some debate of who else could play at center forward, that to me seems like a pretty big loss.
Okay. So you're saying it's not just the personnel that's changed from 2018, but also the way that personnel fits their style of play and their abilities.
Because they were not the second best team at the World Cup, right? But they, as you said, deserve to get there because it all fit together really well. This is going to be an interesting team, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all comes together at the World Cup because it was unexpected in 2018. So will it be unexpected once again? Will they be able to continue that? Let's close things out with Canada. Canada, 2-1 winners over Japan about an hour ago. In the United Arab Emirates, a big game for them. Not the full star complements for Canada and Japan, which is a little worrying for Canada. Alphonso Davies, he struggled with some injuries over the course of this season for Bayern. He did not dress today. Steven Eustachio, who was injured in training yesterday, originally was slated to be on the bench 10 minutes before the game. It was announced that he wouldn't even be available on the bench. It sounds like it's all safety precautions. They just want to have him healthy, but obviously a starter for Porto. And for this Canada team, if you never watched them play before, if you are a neutral, if you are looking for something to say, why would I watch them? This is a team that's easy to root for. First time at a World Cup in 36 years. They have players that you want to win. Alphonso Davies, born in a refugee camp, became the face of the World Cup bid as a host for Canada, going to FIFA, speaking as a teenager in front of all of them, and now the star of this country. He's a guy that you cannot root against no matter what you want to do, and there are many other pieces in this team like that. Just go look at their roster announcement last week and the baby pictures coming out from all the players who, not that they couldn't imagine they'd play in a World Cup, they couldn't imagine the Canadian men's side being in a World Cup for them to even be eligible to play for. Atiba Hutchinson at 39 years old, if he makes 2 appearances in the group stage, would hit 100 caps in his Canada career, which would be all-time #1 on the men's side. So that's the big story around this Canada team. Bobby, here's my fact, by the way, about Canada. So Canada by landmass is the second largest country in the world. It has approximately 35 million people as its population. And 72% of that population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border. So basically, the entire country lives in the bottom sliver of the country, and then the rest of it is pretty much unmanned, I guess you could say, which I always thought was really interesting. And the first time I heard that, I was like, shut up, sitting in a bar in Toronto.
And good fact, not an A-level David Goss fact.
No, but better than Denmark's population comparison to the rest of Scandinavia.
Okay, moving on. The one thing I want to say about this Canadian team, David, is I think you're exactly right about how easy they are to cheer for as players and as humans. They also seem to me to be the team that can just go out and enjoy it the most. That they are really like the screw it, let's just go out and ball and see what happens group, which always has its advantages. And if you look at the rest of the teams, pretty much every other team in the tournament has some type of pressure, some type of angst, where if they don't make it out of the group, the country is disappointed, or they don't really have a chance to make it out of the group. Canada is in this wonderful Venn diagram of legitimately has the ability to make it to the knockout rounds, but nobody will be upset if they don't, so they can fully just go out and enjoy themselves. And A, that comes with its advantages, but B, I think as a fan, it's also just fun to watch because the World Cup should be joyful. It should be fun for these players. And I think that's what we're going to see from this Canadian team.
Yeah, I know a lot of fans are just hoping for that one moment, take a lead, tie the game, something like that to rally around. If you want more in-depth coverage of Canada, like we said about the US on Tuesday, Extra Time will have a ton of breakdown. We're going to dig in deep on the US and Canada. Today, there was a full roster release show about the U.S. roster. Last week, we talked about Canada's roster as well on Monday's show pretty extensively. So that is your spot for those two teams. We will, of course, cover them throughout the World Cup. We'll have your reaction shows every day, 5 p.m. Eastern time throughout the group stage. That will come after U.S. and Canada games. So we will dig in deep on these teams, but we know many of the people listening here are fairly well-versed on these two sides. Let's move to Group G now. And like Group D yesterday, we've got a same again group as what we saw in Russia in 2018. At the time, it was Group E. Brazil finished first, Switzerland finished second, and Serbia finished third. At the time, in 2018, they were joined by Costa Rica. Now in Qatar, they will be joined by Cameroon. For the results on those, Brazil drew Switzerland 1-1. Then the Swiss beat Serbia 2-1, and then Brazil closed out the group, beating Serbia 2-0. So that's the history already between those teams. It's the only time Serbia and Switzerland have ever faced against each other. Bobby, what should we expect this time?
Yeah, and read off how that group finished to me again, David.
Brazil 1, Switzerland 2, Serbia 3, Costa Rica 4.
Okay. And that is what the market thinks will likely happen this time. Brazil is over 90% projection to make it out of the group. And again, this is what the makeup of this group is similar to what we saw with groups A, B, and C on Monday and Tuesday, which is a clear front runner. And then the second and third teams are pretty even. It's largely a toss-up. Their odds are both around 50%. Right now, people seem to think that Switzerland is slightly favored over Serbia, but pretty close. And then Cameroon down at about 26%, which as a comparison was higher than we saw for Qatar as the fourth place group, higher than we saw for Saudi Arabia, even higher than we saw from a Japan who was projected to finish third in their group. So Cameroon at the bottom, but slightly higher than we've seen from some other teams in their role.
Interesting. All right, let's get started. I'm going to go first, and I'm going to talk about Brazil. And there are special things in the world of sports I think we can all agree on. New Zealand All Blacks, when they step on the field and do the haka, the red car for Ferrari, Real Madrid's whites, and Brazil's yellow at a World Cup is one of them. Everyone knows where they were when they first saw Brazil. Everyone has a story of how they fell in love with the sport through Brazil at a World Cup. And everyone, when they talk about the highest levels of the game, reference a Brazilian team, whether it's 1970 or 02 or the Confed Cup, whatever it is, Brazil is that line. And sometimes it's not more complicated than that. That, to me, is worth tuning in for, being excited about, watching. And I was in Brazil in 2014. I don't root for a lot of favorites in sports. I love underdogs, but the passion, the love, the connection, every country loves their national team, but it's different in Brazil. And I would feel good for all of those fans if this team was able to win a World Cup.
I was going to ask you what your Brazil moment, but it was 2014. Yeah. Mine was 2002 when Ronaldo is 1v1 with Oliver Kahn and step overs. I think steps left, goes right, and just slips in the goal. And I remember thinking to myself, I actually definitively remember, and this is an OG comment for some people listening out there. I was at an ODP state training camp. Nice. So we're in the dorm with 50 other young soccer playing boys, and we're crowded into a room. And I think we all looked at each other and goes, who in a World Cup final with the nation's hopes on his shoulders has the gall to step over a goalie and go to the side? I mean, most of us would have slipped, and that was like, oh, that's Brazilian football. Yeah. Okay.
And it's special, and this team is special. They won CONMEBOL qualifying by 6 points over Argentina, 17 points better than Uruguay in third place. They dominated from start to finish. They did not lose a game. They scored 40 goals. They conceded 5. The last time we saw Brazil was in Copa America last year, losing the final at home. Not really in front of fans, so the home part you could debate, against Argentina. They won in 2019 at home. That was their 9th Copa America title all time. And then at the 2018 World Cup, they lost, I think, unfairly to Belgium 2-1 after winning, as I said, this Group E over these teams. They beat Mexico in the round of 16 2-0 in the last World Cup. And the overview, the juice, whatever you want to say, is this team's really good. They are the best team in the world. There are some question marks around some of the positions, but this is Brazil elite.
David, I want you to give me another sentence on why they are so elite, because right now the world seems to think that they are definitively the front runner and the favorite to win this tournament. And depending on where you check, they're almost as big of a front runner as you will really ever see in a World Cup, with their margin over the second tier, which is France and Argentina. So walk me through, because I have some questions after this, but just give me the high level on why the world thinks that they are undoubtedly the favorite coming into this tournament.
They have many of their best players in their prime, in their best moments. They have all of the quality you expect from Brazil with the balance we have not seen in arguably 12 years for Brazil. And all of that comes underneath a steady manager who's been there for a while, who seems to be able to keep a lot of the noise out of the camp. Because with Brazil, it's always chaos, right? The story is around, what did Ronaldo, should he have started in 98? What did he drink off the side? There's always so much happening because it's the 5th biggest country in the world. This is the biggest team, and there's so many people around it. Tite seems to have the ability to keep a lot of that out and keep this team steady.
Yeah, and I think to add to that too, because I think one of my concerns comes from when you look at the lineup, that the lineup doesn't pop on paper, right? Richarlison, Paqueta,
which I
Fred.
disagree on a lot of this, but okay.
You disagree on they're the key players?
Richarlison is like an elite player in the world.
I don't disagree. I agree that he's an elite player, right? He is maybe not quite a starter, but a regular for Tottenham, right? Paqueta's showed at AC Milan how good he can be. Fred, I've loved at Man United. Add him to the joyful list for me, please. But when I look at this group, right, it doesn't stand out to me over what France can offer, over what England's front six can offer, over what Argentina's front six can offer. And I say that because I think when we talk about Brazil, we have the habit, and I certainly fall into this, of saying, what can the attackers do? Because we have the memories of Ronaldo and Rivaldo and Bobetta and Romario, Ronaldinho. But we forget that really what makes Brazilian football special, from a youth level to what happens in the Brazilian Serie A, is the defending and the physicality, which is really this team's trademark right now. It's not the Neymar and the Richarlison in the attack. It's what happens on the other end of the field.
And that's where I think when you look at Brazil over the last 8 years, obviously 2014, the disappointment, you've swapped out a David Luiz who was high and lows, and Dani Alves as well, although he's a part of this group, for a Marquinhos in his prime, potentially Eder Militao, who's the starter for Real Madrid in his prime, although he's not a starter right now over Thiago Silva, but he's an option. You've got Danilo and Telles as well as the fullbacks. It all fits together the right way. I would disagree with you. I would say they also have elite talent in Brazilian style. I mean, there's a chance where Vinicius doesn't start for this team, who is already a starter for Real Madrid, a Champions League winner. He is the future. When you talk about Mbappe and other guys, he's in that list for me already. And there's a chance he does not start every single game. There's a chance Fabinho doesn't start. Again, if Fred is poor, Casemiro, who's been one of the three best.
If Fred is poor, I mean, come on.
Right.
Come on. Let's go to the Jets there.
You have those options. So that is why Brazil is the favorites. Balance, top-end quality, depth, as well as, you mentioned France and England, no other team outside of Argentina is coming in on as good a form. So not only does Brazil have these pieces have proven they can play well together.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I can be skeptical, but going back to what we said about Belgium, the proof is there. The sample is there. This team has been dominant over the last 5 years. One thing I do want to bring up, because it's partially what one of my big questions is for them, but also a really interesting data point. And it's that Neymar is actually only 3 goals away from passing Pelé as Brazil's all-time leading scorer. Pelé had 77, Neymar currently has 75. So that would, of course, be a very special moment in Brazilian football and for Neymar. But I'm also excited to see how Neymar does in a true old-fashioned number 10 position. And somewhere Matt Doyle is out there giggling to himself that this excites me in any way, because I generally don't like the number 10 position and think it's mostly a lie and a scam and the way people talk about it. But I think when it comes to Neymar, it's special because he does wear the number 10 for Brazil. And we also just have not really seen him play that role much in his career.
Yeah.
That when we think about this player, again, we come back to the Brazilian number 10 and the mold that's been in our minds, but he's mostly been a player who starts out wide and maybe drifts in, but has primarily been a winger. So I am excited to see what he does when he is fully given the keys as the player underneath the striker.
And I know we're going too long because it's Brazil, but it's Brazil. That's where Paqueta is actually interesting, because he's the glue that can do all the other things. He fits into this team with whatever other 10 players are on the field, hence why he's been leaned on. We've seen that in the past with Renato Augusto and Paulinho, where there are these guys that you wouldn't assume start for Brazil, but you need one guy who can be flexible and play a lot of ways so that all the other players can be in their favorite position. Bobby, take us now from romance to neutrality. Take us to Switzerland.
I know you have thoughts on that neutrality part, David.
Any thoughts?
So, okay, starting with Switzerland, the first basic trivia to know about the country is Switzerland is one of the most federalist countries in the world, which means that they give a lot of authority to their local governments. They have 26 cantons, which are effectively their states, and perhaps more than other countries, more than most countries, they give power and authority to those local cantons more than they do to the central federal government. So if you're curious about that type of thing, an interesting country and one to read more about. Do you have anything to add about
Not
Swiss
at all.
federal government system?
I'm actually just excited that you're learning. I think this has been a really good week for you to just get out in the world and learn about different places. So I'm excited.
I know I know that's a burn, but I'll take it because I also am excited for it. I am excited that I can now tell you the difference between a head of government and a head of state and why the heck the chancellor is different than the president in Germany. All right, David?
Yeah, I like that too. I don't know what a canton means, but continue.
Okay. How did the Swiss team make it to the Men's World Cup? They won their UEFA qualifying group ahead of Italy. And remember, that's important because then Italy did what next?
Macedonia.
Yes, Italy lost the qualifier because anything can happen in those knockout rounds of the qualifier. So Switzerland did win their group, and they have actually now qualified for the last 5 tournaments, which stood out to me. I'm not sure that I had Switzerland as that consistent, but they deserve more credit than they get. The last time we saw them was, for U.S. men's national team fans, playing against the U.S. in 2021. It was a 2-1 Switzerland win in Switzerland. And then in the 2020 Euros, they lost in the quarterfinals in PKs to Spain. Spain ended up losing in the semifinal to the eventual winner, Italy. Anything to add at this point, David?
Did you say the U.S.?
Switzerland played the U.S.
in the World Cup?
In 2021.
Oh.
In a friendly.
Got it. I thought you were talking about the 2018 World Cup. I was like,
no, sorry. Yeah. Oh, I might have left out the 2021 component. That was when the U.S. crushed Switzerland for 20 minutes and missed a couple chances, and everyone said, "Oh my God, we've arrived!" And then Switzerland flicked the switch, and they were the dominant team for the next 60 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So the important thing to know about this Switzerland team is that they are the team who can beat you with their defending. Then I will again emphasize the beat you with their defending, because we've talked about how other teams have defensive solidity, that they are very strong in the defensive phases. But I would think of most of those teams as being strong in the defensive phases for a survival mechanism, to keep themselves in the game, because it's the easier route to go in international football. Whereas the Swiss team will actually use their defending actively to beat you as their advantage. It is a generally consistent group of players. It's a pretty defined squad who have reps together, and they can switch back and forth between a competent mid-block and then go press you and try and win the ball in advanced areas and then score using their defending. And again, as a reversal from a lot of teams who just defend and then will maybe transition just because it's the only other option.
Is there anything that we should know in terms of triggers or space or these matchups that pressing that we should watch for?
Oh, I like that question a lot. I don't have a good answer to it. I wouldn't be able to tell you the specific thing to see, as much as just their ability to bounce back and forth between the mid-block into the press. But I think it's a great question, and I should have had a better answer.
Nice. Anything else?
Well, the other thing I do want to point out for their players to watch, and I'll bring up 2 players. The first is Manuel Akanji, who is currently a center back at Manchester City. He just moved there this year. He's not necessarily in the rotation, but certainly has the quality, a key player in this Swiss team. And the other player I always like to talk about is Granit Xhaka. Maybe listeners know him from his time at Arsenal. And he's one of these players that I've always found to be interesting because I thought his style is misunderstood, that he's a hard man, right? He's always getting cards. He's always tackling, which got him shoved into a defensive midfield role at the bottom of a pivot. But now that Arsenal head coach Mikel Arteta has moved him higher up to a more 8 position opposed to in the pivot role, he is much better because that fits his skill set. He wants to pass. He wants to get in the box. And I've really enjoyed seeing his renaissance, so to speak, once a manager figured out what he does well. And I think we also see a similar role with him in Switzerland, where he will start deeper at times in a double pivot, but really he's given license to get forward in a way that I think really allows him to express himself. And I like watching what he can add to a game. He
has always played that way for Switzerland. And the question has always been, why can't he play the same for Arsenal as he does for Switzerland without acknowledging that difference in role? And like 12 goals, okay, that's a decent amount for him. It's not ridiculous, but he is the attacking piece in this Swiss team. He's the one who pushes the attack, and that's sort of going to be his role again. So I'm glad you brought that up because that's been his success. Now, here's my issue with Switzerland. They play up to all of their opponents, and they challenge some really great teams at the highest level. You mentioned them. They beat France at the Euros last year. They also play down to their opponents. They lost to Ghana 2-0 earlier today. They lost to Sweden in the round of 16 at the last World Cup, which should have been a once-in-a-lifetime chance. You're Switzerland in a knockout stage of the World Cup to try and go the furthest your country's ever gone, and you draw Sweden. Like, that's a good draw, and they came out flat. And so that's my concern about Switzerland has always been, is that they don't control the way their games play out.
I just want to say that's 2 knocks on you from you on Sweden this show, and you're 1 from getting booted.
Calibu,
Okay.
Calibu, I'm on a sweet Anna.
But yeah, I think that's a great observation, right? It's a type of team when if they play, you're perfectly comfortable. You're almost more comfortable as a Swiss fan when they play a better team than when they play a weaker team, and that it shifts the anxiety you have going into that game.
Now, their hope is this is the best team they've ever put on the field at a World Cup, and so maybe that changes. The other thing to notice in this one is, well, they'll play Brazil, which means they'll play up. They'll play Cameroon, which is a team that they'll think they're better than. And then the last team they'll play is Serbia in the World Cup. It'll be the second time ever these teams face off, and I don't think it's a game that the Swiss players will take lightly. There is a large rivalry inside the teams between Switzerland and Serbia. We'll get to Serbia right now, but if you want to know a little more, go back and watch first the highlights of the 2018 World Cup match. Granit Xhaka scored and Xherdan Shaqiri scored. Both of them put up the eagle insignia with their hands. After that, they are both either born or born of Kosovoan parents. They're 2 of about 5 in this roster. And there was a civil war between Kosovo and Serbia. There's a belief in the greater Albanian space. So we don't pick either side because we don't know enough about this, but it does cause some tension. There was international issues. There was fines and suspensions to Xhaka and Shaqiri afterwards. There had to be meetings at the EU as well as the UN. So this is a big deal. This game is going to be massive in this World Cup for that off-field stuff. Shaqiri basically got booed every time he was on screen in the last game against Serbia. For Serbia, Bobby, do you like raspberries?
Do I like raspberries? Yeah.
95% of the world's raspberries come from Serbia. That is a shocking stat. I had no idea that any raspberries came from Serbia, let alone that percentage. So anyone out there who's enjoying chocolate, raspberries, anything else with berries, yogurt, granola, whatever, you can thank Serbia for that.
The dream scenario is that we have a Morocco v Serbia matchup in the next round, so we can have the Moroccan food with the raspberries as an appetizer.
Yeah, that sounds great. And one of the keys to Moroccan food is having sweet in with salty, like prunes and apricots. That's the best part. All right, let's talk about this Serbia team. When you look at the squad, they have a chance to get out of the group, which would be historic. It would be the first time ever in Serbian history. Of course, they've played as Yugoslavia, Serbia, Montenegro, so it's a little confusing, but it would be historic for them to just get out of the group. For a few big name players, this is their last chance, the biggest one being Tadic. For many of the players, though, this is going to be a building block to 2026. There is a lot of young talent coming through in Serbia, a lot of young talent that's moving to bigger European leagues before they even debut at the first team level into academies. And that is the belief that this is a pipeline coming out of Serbia and not just a golden generation to get here. They won Group A. Yes.
I just want to say really quick, David, that get your waiting for 2026 crap out of here, man. Like, that's not a thing. That shouldn't be a thing. It's the World Cup. You don't punt on a World Cup to get to the next World Cup. So
did you not hear me say the Moroccan FA president said we're excited about the
No, it's bad. Maybe it's you, maybe it's them, but whatever it is, I'm banning it from the show.
Okay, that's fine. They won Group A to get here, so they qualified automatically. They beat Portugal, if you remember, in stoppage time on the final day with Mitrovic scoring the dramatic goal to get them there. They have not qualified for the Euros since they've been Yugoslavia, so they were not at the 2021 Euros. And then, as we've talked about already, they finished third in Group E in the last World Cup, playing against many of these same teams. Alek Mitrovic, he is one of the stars of this team. As I said, scored that big goal. That made up for the miss he had in Euro qualifying the year before, which knocked the team out. 50 goals in his international career. He accomplished that in less games than Cristiano Ronaldo and Leo Messi. He missed the game with Fulham last week with an ankle injury, so there are question marks around his availability, but that is how good he has been at the international level. And Bobby, the other star, you can take it from here.
Well, I just want to say on Mitrovic, shout out to all the 2014 Football Manager players out there when he was the Wonder Kid. I know you're listening. Congratulations. And the other person I do know, I appreciate the space to talk about this, is Dusan Tadic, previously of Southampton, now at Ajax. And David, if I were to build my dream international midfield, I can mostly just build it from today's show with Fred at the pivot behind Granit Xhaka and Dusan Tadic, and that midfield would ball out. Because Tadic is one of the most fun players to watch. So silky, so smooth, but also smooth in a way that is infectious to his teammates, and the way that his team plays is equally as fun to watch.
It's going to be interesting because, as you said, he's been a star for Ajax, which is obviously one of the most possession-heavy teams in the world. Serbia led UEFA World Cup qualifying in direct attacks. So they are north and south transitional. If Mitrovic can't go, they still have stars up top in Vlahovic as well as Luka Jovic. So they still have studs that can play up top alongside him. But with Filip Kostic out left, this is a team that's going to look to cross the ball, deep crosses, and try and defend deep and go in transition, which is not his style, but we've seen him be great at it because he's an elite player and he's special. All right, Bobby, you ready to move on to the next one or anything you want to push back on?
Let's go Cameroon. Okay, Cameroon, the main trivia thing to know about the country that maybe you didn't before was I personally did not realize how ecologically diverse Cameroon is, in that it has rainforests, it has beaches, it has mountains, it has the desert, it has savanna. And this also comes out in the flag, and that if you can picture the Cameroon flag, in the middle of it is a yellow star, and that yellow star is a symbol of unity. And it is the idea of unity, that green is the color for vegetation of the south, while the yellow is the color for the savannas of the north, and the red symbolizes the link between that vegetation and that south with the savanna and the north. And this is even particularly important right now because, and I won't get into it, so I'll point people to just read about it, but right now Cameroon can actually use a moment of national unity because there is some internal turmoil. If you're interested in reading more about it, I would just look up the Anglophone crisis. It was brought up last year when Cameroon also hosted AFCON in 2021. So it is an important moment right now. Hopefully this national team can bring together a country that has some conversation inside of it. And that is called the Anglophone crisis for anybody that wants to read more.
All right. How'd they get here? How are we supposed to know?
So this Cameroon team won their group ahead of the Ivory Coast, right? An impressive accomplishment. Sometimes in African qualifying, the second team isn't that strong, but when you're grouped with Ivory Coast, you worry. And this Cameroon team made it out of it. And then they beat Algeria in the playoff, and they actually beat Algeria. And you might have seen this video come across your social media in just an amazing way with the last minute goal. It was spectacular to watch. And actually
22nd minute, I think.
Yes.
In Algeria.
And it propelled this Cameroon team to the World Cup. And remember, Cameroon has qualified for the most World Cups of all countries from Africa. So this is a place that they do expect to be. And the last time we saw them was perhaps in that video because they did not qualify for the 2018 World Cup. And then they finished third at the 2021 AFCON that they hosted. They had hoped to win it as the host. It didn't happen, but overall third, not a bad result behind two good Senegal and Egypt teams. And they only lost to Egypt in penalties in the semifinals.
I do have to say, in thinking about this World Cup, and I think Qatar is its own thing, they're the host, whatever, I would argue that this Cameroon team is the one that many fans think shouldn't be here. And for me, probably the most upsetting, in that I'm happy for Cameroon. I'm excited to root for them. But Algeria, I think, was in a special place to try and contend at this World Cup. And it was a shock when Cameroon was able to knock them off and get here.
Well, let me tell you why, as a neutral, you should be very happy they are here.
Suck me in.
And I do want to give Joe Lowry of Total Soccer Show a shout out because I thought he used a great line and he called it the lopsided team. I had here written down the gold squad. And they are the gold squad because whereas with most of the teams we've talked about, if you have attacking talent, what's the sentence we would say next, David?
How can you defend?
Well, they're defensively solid. Right? They sit in the mid block, they stay organized, and then maybe they get the ball up to the attackers and the attackers do something. This Cameroon team is not that. They have probably their most talented players in every part of the attack relative to the defense. And then they're a team that also plays an attacking style. They don't just want to sit back and wait and soak up pressure and go. They also want to play on the front foot. They also want to try and use those attackers as much as possible. And it creates goals on either end. So I do appreciate that they come into this tournament wanting to both use those attackers and also as a team play an attacking style.
You want to give us some names to know?
Yeah. So the The main names to know are in goal. They have Andre Onana, previous of Ajax. He's currently the starter in Inter Milan in Italy. In the midfield, they do have a regular for Napoli. You mentioned on yesterday's show that Napoli is probably the best team in the world right now, or at least one of the top three. And Anguissa starts at center mid for that Napoli team. And then up top is Vincent Aboubakar, who won the Golden Boot at last year's AFCON. He plays at Al Nassr. One name we did not say was Eric Choupo-Moting, who plays at Bayern Munich. Not a regular starter, isn't necessarily a regular starter for his national team, but we have seen what he can do off the bench for 10-time Bundesliga champions Bayern. So keep an eye on his ability to change a game. And then just as another reference point, like the other winger who we didn't even mention plays regularly at Lyon. So that's the type of attacking talent that this team can bring.
Choupo-Moting, 12 goals/assists in the last 9 games that he's played for Bayern. Coming in on ridiculous form.
I just want to say, coming into this conversation, I was going to talk about how great he is, and you're like, but he doesn't really start at Bayern. And then I was like, I don't know, dude. He's in pretty great form. You're going to drop that stat. Yeah, are you going to drive the bus backward now too?
No, I stole your stat. But the conversation was, right now they play 4-3-3, one center forward. So Aboubakar and him cannot both start unless you change where they play or you change the formation. Are they good enough and necessary enough to change the formation is the question mark. And I think that's, to me, what everyone's asking about what Rigobert Song will do.
And it is worth pointing out that Rigobert Song is their head coach, former star of the national team. And there have actually been some questions about the influence he has over this team.
Yeah, he was the one to announce the roster, and he was unable to pronounce some of the names of the players. And it's caused a bit of a media storm in saying he didn't know who was on the roster. He doesn't know who these players are. He didn't pick them. Now, one thing is he did take over the team very recently. So there's some fairness that he may not know a lot of the pieces. I think this is overblown. My first reaction is I have interviewed players and coaches everywhere where you've said a player's name and they've not recognized who that player is because they don't go by their name, right? In a locker room, everyone goes by nicknames or they choose one part of their name. I mean, we've got Brazilians that we call Fred. If I walked into Manchester United's locker room and asked Eric Ten Hag what he thought about, I don't know Fred's full name. I probably should have looked that up before.
But this happened to me. My first real name is William. So when I was on international trips with youth national teams or with my club teams, and I got announced by the referees when they come to the locker room to check, nobody knew who I was. So I've been in this scenario personally where the coach just didn't know the name that was on the roster. So I tend to agree with you. I'm generally pro gossip in this scenario and drama, but I tend to agree that it is overblown in this scenario.
The other piece about this was they had him sit with a printed out piece of paper in front of like 500 media members crammed into a small room. The guy's a legendary soccer player and now a coach. That doesn't mean he's good at that.
Yeah.
Once he slipped up on one name, the assistant coach leaned over and sort of, it seemed like show him where he was at on the list. And everyone took that as they're telling him who to say. And that's where a lot of the controversy comes from.
The reason there is a conversation about this too, we probably should have led with it, is that the current head of Cameroon football is
Samuel Eto'o.
Samuel Eto'o, the national icon previously of Barcelona, of Inter Milan, an incredible playing career. He is now
also,
effectively
fun fact, Real Madrid. He came to Real Madrid. Yeah. He is up on the wall when you go to the Bernabeu. He was technically played in Real Madrid's academy before he went to Barcelona.
That's what I should have used as the Cameroon fun fact.
Yeah.
Nice job. So you can understand why there are questions when you have a man like Samuel Eto'o as the boss, as the person leading it, and the influence he may or may not have. We'll stay alive, do it as the stories come out. Right now, I think, David, we both would suspect it's not particularly important. It's important enough to mention, but we'll just keep an eye on it as the tournament goes along.
Well, and the Samuel Eto'o, one half was he has made the push to try and win some dual national players to come and play for Cameroon. There's 3 pretty much specific players on this roster that they say are because of Samuel Eto'o. One is Brian Buemo, who plays for Brentford, is also eligible for France, will play out on the wing, might start, and is a really big deal. One is Kevin Nkudu, who you remember from playing for Tottenham, now at Besiktas. And then one is Christopher Wu, who might start at center back for this team. So that's a lot of the positives of what he's brought. There is also a rumor that Michael Gadou, who's starting week in and week out in Belgium, for his club, playing in top form at center back, was left out of the team because of personal disagreements with Eto'o. So there's a lot of good and bad there, and then hence why people believe maybe Song's less influential than the average coach, and Samuel Eto'o's more influential than you'd expect. Either way, as you said, Cameroon's must watch because they are going to bring the goals, and this group's going to be a lot of fun. I talked about from last World Cup to this World Cup, you're basically swapping the most defensive team in the World Cup in Costa Rica for Cameroon, who, as you said, are probably the most mismanaged offensive team, which has the potential to make this group really, really fun. Either way, the favorites of the entire World Cup, Brazil, are in this group, and so that's going to be must watch no matter what. All right, Bobby, that takes us to the end of Group F and Group G. Feel good?
I feel great. I did lose track of which specific groups we were on at one point in the show, so I'm glad you brought it up. But I feel great, man. I'm ready for this tournament to start. One more group tomorrow. We've intentionally not been giving our predictions or expectations because we're saving that for the final preview show. And I'm just looking forward to all of it.
We also, you have mentioned this before, we are going to do some fun awards throughout the tournament that we're going to continue to update. We got some really good feedback of what they should be. Best through ball, I think, was one. What player influences the refs in the best way. We want all of those because that's going to be part of what our show will be starting on Sunday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, coming off the opener, and then 5 p.m. Eastern time every day through the group stage and round of 16, and then adjusted there from game times. We want that to be a part of it. We want you guys to pick those groups. So send them to us because if we can get some of them, we can make some predictions on them tomorrow. As Bobby said, we will finish out with Group H. Then we will do our predictions, our picks, all of that. We did get a question from a Canada fan who said, are USMNT supporters just quietly ignoring this Canada result against Japan? I got a bunch of texts from Canada fans saying, is Canada now better than the US because they beat Japan and the US lost? Was that not proven when Canada won World Cup qualifying and beat the US head to head? I don't think the transitive property through Japan is necessary at this point. I think Canada is the giants of CONCACAF.
David, if we were to switch the U.S. and Canada went into the U.S.'s group, we talked about how the U.S. is currently effectively neck and neck with Wales at 50% ahead of, and then Iran is lowest. Where does Canada go into that? Does Canada go in at 30% like they have now, or do they get the 50%?
I think they get bumped. They would be equal favorites to Wales, maybe slightly below because they're younger, but I think they would be very close, and I would feel comfortable picking them to get out of the group. I also think I'd feel I think the U.S. would do well in Canada's group. I think the U.S. plays well against good teams and poorly against bad teams, similar to what we talked about with Switzerland. But it'll be interesting to watch it no matter what. Sunday, as I said, we're going to come on live an hour after the Qatar-Ecuador game to break it all down, react. We will then have a massive preview about the U.S.-Wales game coming up on Monday, as well as previewing all those games. And we want you guys to all be involved. So come on into that show and then hit the request, and we're going to pull some people in to chat with us about that game. That's all for us here today. As I've said many times, search MLS Today to find Clubbing Country Today here in that Twitter feed. Group A, Pamo Duka on Monday. Group B and C, including Hugo Ramirez from Mexico City on Tuesday. Group D and E yesterday. And Group F and G, talking Canada, Belgium, Brazil, and everything else throughout this show. If you missed any of the show, you can go there. The podcast comes out in about an hour, and you can listen to it on demand as you want. All right, one group left to go. 2 days away from the opener of the 2022 World Cup. I'm David Goss, Bobby Warshaw. Thank you, all of you out there, for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.